The desperate signal communications officer Elena Vasquez had been monitoring deep space frequencies for 3 years aboard Station Omega-7, and she had never heard anything like the signal that crackled through her headset at 347 hours. The transmission was weak, fragmented, and buried beneath layers of cosmic interference that would have made most species dismiss it as stellar noise. But Elena had grown up in the slums of Neo-Barcelona, where survival meant listening to whispers others couldn't hear. She adjusted her equipment with practiced precision, filtering out the background radiation that poured from the nearby Zephyr Nebula. The nebula was a navigation nightmare, a swirling mass of ionized gas and electromagnetic storms that had claimed dozens of ships over the centuries. Most species marked it as a no-fly zone on their star charts. Humans, characteristically, had built a monitoring station right on its edge. The signal clarified slightly, and Elena's blood ran cold. It wasn't random cosmic noise. It was a distress call, transmitted on emergency frequencies in a language her computer couldn't immediately translate, but the tone was universal: fear, desperation, and the kind of hope that only comes when death is close enough to smell. Elena's fingers flew across her console, recording every fragment of the transmission while simultaneously running it through the station's linguistic analysis programs. The universal translator struggled with the alien syntax, but gradually, words began to emerge from the static. Dying, swarm consuming, home burning. Please, anyone, help us. Station Commander Marcus Chen arrived at Elena's station within minutes of her alert. He was a compact man with graying temples and the kind of steady presence that came from 30 years in deep space operations. He listened to the cleaned-up transmission twice before speaking. Origin point? He asked quietly. Elena's hands were shaking slightly as she pulled up the star charts. Deep inside the Zephyr Nebula, sir. Approximately 47 light-years from our current position. The signal had to have been incredibly powerful to reach us through all that interference. Chen studied the nebula's swirling mass on the display. Ships that entered the Zephyr rarely came out again. The electromagnetic storms could fry navigation systems in minutes, while the dense gas clouds made conventional faster-than-light travel impossible. It was a cosmic graveyard that most civilizations avoided entirely. Any idea who sent it? Chen asked. The linguistic analysis program chimed softly, and Elena pulled up the results. Computer identifies the language as belonging to the Kalari, a species from the Outer Rim. According to our databases, they're a peaceful civilization, primarily focused on agriculture and scientific research, no military to speak of. Chen's expression darkened. The Kalari had never bothered anyone, never expanded aggressively, never even raised their voices in galactic politics. They were the kind of neighbors everyone wanted, quiet, helpful, and completely defenseless. The message mentions a swarm, Elena continued. Something that's consuming their homeworld. Sir, if this is accurate, we might be looking at genocide. Chen was quiet for a long moment, staring at the nebula that separated them from whatever hell the Kalari were enduring. Standard military protocol was clear. Deep space monitoring stations were not equipped for rescue operations, especially not in areas as dangerous as the Zephyr Nebula. His job was to monitor, record, and report, not to play hero. But Chen had joined Earth's deep space service because someone had to listen to the voices crying out in the darkness between stars, and sometimes listening wasn't enough. Send an encrypted burst transmission to Earth Command, he ordered. Full priority. Include everything we've got on this signal, plus our tactical assessment of the situation. And Elena? Yes, sir. Keep monitoring that frequency. If there are more transmissions, I want to know about them immediately. Back on Earth, Admiral Sarah Blake was reviewing supply requisitions when the priority alert flashed across her command display. As head of the Terran Defense Force's Rapid Response Division, she had seen her share of emergency transmissions. But something about this one made her set down her coffee and give it her full attention. The Kalari distress call played through her office speakers 3 times before she fully absorbed what she was hearing. The linguistic analysis suggested a civilization under attack by something they called the swarm. The fragmentary nature of the transmission implied either massive communication infrastructure damage or active jamming by hostile forces. Blake called up everything the TDF database had on the Kailari. It wasn't much. They were a peaceful species that had achieved faster-than-light travel about 2 centuries ago, but had never shown any interest in expansion or conflict. Their homeworld was in a region of space that most species considered worthless. No strategic resources, no trade routes, no military significance whatsoever, which made the attack even more puzzling. Who would waste resources attacking a civilization that posed no threat to anyone? Blake's contemplation was interrupted by her aide, Lieutenant Commander James Park. "Ma'am, the Joint Chiefs are requesting an immediate briefing on the Kalari situation. They want your tactical assessment within the hour." Blake nodded grimly. She already knew what her assessment would be. The Zephyr Nebula was a death trap that had swallowed entire fleets. Attempting a rescue operation would be throwing good lives after bad. Any sane military commander would recommend monitoring the situation and filing a formal protest with whatever government was responsible for the attack. But Blake had not joined the military to be sane. She had joined because someone had to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. An hour later, Blake stood before the assembled Joint Chiefs in the Pentagon's secure briefing room. The holographic display showed the Zephyr Nebula in all its lethal glory, a swirling mass of death that had been claiming ships for centuries. "The situation is straightforward," Blake began. "A peaceful civilization is under attack and has requested assistance. The location makes any rescue attempt extremely hazardous but not impossible." General Harrison, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, leaned forward. "Admiral, our analysis suggests that any fleet sent into that nebula would have less than a 30% chance of survival, let alone success. We're talking about risking thousands of human lives for a species we barely know." Blake had expected this argument. "With respect, sir, the risk to our forces is irrelevant. We have received a distress call from a civilization facing extinction. Our response to that call will define who we are as a species." "What exactly are you proposing?" asked General Martinez, head of fleet operations. Blake activated the tactical display showing her preliminary mission plan. "I'm proposing we deploy the 7th Fleet under my personal command. The flagship Indomitable and her escorts are equipped with the latest navigation and shielding technology. If anyone can make it through the nebula, it's us." The room was quiet for a moment. Finally, General Harrison spoke. "Admiral, I understand your concerns, but we have to consider the strategic implications. If we lose an entire fleet on what might be a hopeless mission, we'll be significantly weakened against more immediate threats." Blake had one more card to play, and she played it without hesitation. "General, 3 days ago, the Kailari transmitted detailed technical specifications for a new type of faster-than-light drive that could revolutionize space travel. They sent it as payment for any assistance we might provide. They're not asking for charity, they're asking for trade." That changed everything. The room buzzed with whispered conversations as the implications sank in. New FTL technology could give humanity a significant advantage in the ongoing Cold War with several aggressive alien species. But Blake knew that wasn't really why they would approve the mission. They would approve it for the same reason she had proposed it. Because when someone sent out a cry for help, humans answered. It was what made them human. 2 hours later, Blake received her orders. The 7th Fleet would depart for the Zephyr Nebula within 48 hours. The mission parameters were simple: locate the Kailari homeworld, assess the threat, and provide whatever assistance was possible. As Blake walked through the corridors of the Indomitable, preparing for what might be humanity's most dangerous rescue mission, she thought about the signal that had started it all. Someone, somewhere in the dark between stars, had called out for help. And humanity had heard them. The Indomitable was a testament to human engineering ingenuity. While other species built their ships for elegance or efficiency, humans built theirs to survive. The heavy cruiser bristled with redundant systems, armored hull sections, and enough firepower to level a small moon. More importantly, it was crewed by humans who had grown up on a planet that had spent millions of years trying to kill them. Blake's crew of 2,000 represented the best humanity had to offer. They came from every continent on Earth, speaking dozens of languages and representing countless cultures. But they shared one thing in common. When someone needed help, they stepped forward. As the Indomitable and her escorts entered the outer edges of the Zephyr Nebula, Blake stood on the bridge watching the swirling chaos ahead of them. The nebula's electromagnetic storms could destroy their electronics in seconds. The dense gas clouds could hide entire fleets. And somewhere deep inside that maelstrom, a civilization was dying. "All ships, this is Admiral Blake," she announced over the fleet communication system. "We're about to enter one of the most dangerous regions of space known to any species. The odds against us are considerable, but somewhere ahead of us, people are fighting for their lives against impossible odds. They sent out a call for help and we're going to answer it, because that's what humans do." The fleet plunged into the nebula like a spear thrust into the heart of chaos itself. Behind them, the stars disappeared into a wall of ionized gas and electromagnetic fury. Ahead lay the unknown, and possibly the greatest test humanity had ever faced. The stand that shook the galaxy. The Indomitable shuddered as another electromagnetic pulse tore through the nebula around them. Admiral Blake gripped the railing of her command platform as the lights flickered and sparked throughout the bridge. Around her, her crew worked with the calm efficiency that came from months of training in impossible conditions. "Navigation report," Blake called out over the crackling interference. Lieutenant Sarah Kim looked up from her console, sweat beading on her forehead despite the bridge's environmental controls. "We're holding course, Admiral, but the interference is playing hell with our systems. I've got 3 backup navigation computers running different calculations, and they're all giving me different answers." "Use dead reckoning," Blake ordered. "Plot our course based on the last reliable sensor data and maintain heading. Communications? Any word from the Kalari?" Communications Officer Rodriguez shook his head. "Nothing but static, ma'am. The electromagnetic storms are jamming everything. If there are any transmissions getting through, we're not hearing them." Blake nodded grimly. They had been inside the nebula for 6 hours, navigating by instruments that were barely functioning and following sensor ghosts that might or might not be real. 3 times they had detected what looked like debris fields. Twice they had narrowly avoided collision with massive chunks of ionized matter that appeared out of nowhere. The Zephyr Nebula was proving to be every bit as deadly as its reputation suggested, but Blake's fleet pressed on, driven by the knowledge that somewhere ahead of them, a civilization was fighting for its very existence. "Admiral," called out Science Officer Chen from his station. "I'm detecting artificial structures ahead, multiple large objects, possibly a space station or orbital platform." Blake moved to Chen's station and studied the sensor readings. Through the interference and static, she could make out the ghostly outline of what looked like a massive space habitat. But something was wrong with the image. Sections of the structure appeared to be missing, and there were no signs of active power systems. "Take us in for a closer look," Blake ordered. "All ships, maintain defensive formation and be ready for anything." As the Indomitable approached the structure, the full extent of the devastation became clear. The orbital habitat had been a thing of beauty once, a graceful arrangement of living modules and agricultural sections that spoke of a civilization that valued harmony over efficiency. Now it was a twisted ruin, its hull breached in dozens of places and its interior exposed to the vacuum of space. But it wasn't empty. As Blake watched through the main view screen, she saw movement within the damaged sections. Small insect-like machines scuttled through the corridors, dismantling everything they encountered and feeding the raw materials into larger processing units. The machines moved with perfect coordination, like cells in a vast organism dedicated to consumption and destruction. "My God," whispered Chen. "It's like they're harvesting the entire station." Blake felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't warfare as humans understood it. This was something far worse. It was systematic consumption, the reduction of an entire civilization to raw materials for some unknown purpose. "Admiral," called out Rodriguez suddenly. "I'm getting a weak transmission from somewhere inside the station. It's heavily encrypted, but I think it's coming from a shielded section near the station's core." Blake made her decision instantly. "Launch a rescue shuttle, full marine complement, and equip them with cutting torches and portable shields. If There are survivors in there. We're getting them out. Major Patricia Reeves led the Marine assault team through the twisted corridors of the dying space station. Her squad of 12 moved with the deadly efficiency that came from years of training in hostile environments. Each Marine wore powered armor that could function in vacuum, atmosphere, or the kind of toxic hellscape they might encounter in the station's damaged sections. The insect-like machines paid little attention to the humans at first. They seemed programmed to focus on dismantling the station's infrastructure rather than dealing with small groups of armed intruders. But as the Marines moved deeper into the station, the machines began to take notice. The first attack came without warning. A swarm of the insect machines descended from the ceiling, their cutting tools reconfigured as weapons. But they had never faced humans in combat before, and they were unprepared for the sheer creative violence that Reeves' squad brought to bear. Instead of fighting the machines on their terms, the Marines used their environment as a weapon. Explosive charges turned support beams into projectiles. Atmosphere leaks became pressurized weapons. And when conventional tactics failed, the humans did what humans did best. They improvised. Sergeant Johnson grabbed a handful of the machines and used them as clubs to smash their fellows. Corporal Martinez rewired a power coupling to create an electromagnetic pulse that fried an entire swarm. And when Private Collins ran out of ammunition, she started throwing pieces of the station itself at the attacking machines. The machines adapted quickly, but humans adapted faster. For every new tactic the swarm developed, the Marines invented 3 counters. It was chaos, but it was organized chaos, and chaos was something humans understood better than any species in the galaxy. Finally, the Marines reached the shielded section where the transmission was originating. Behind a jury-rigged barricade, they found 12 survivors of what had once been a population of thousands. The Kailari were tall, graceful beings with iridescent skin and large, expressive eyes that spoke of intelligence and deep sorrow. Their leader, a being who introduced himself as Prime Researcher Veltar, looked at the armored humans with something approaching disbelief. "You came," he said in accented but clear standard. "Through the nebula, through the swarm, you actually came." Reeves helped the injured researcher to his feet. "We got your message. What's the situation here?" Veltar's expression darkened. "The Void Swarm arrived 3 days ago. They don't conquer or enslave. They consume everything. Our cities, our people, our entire civilization. They break it all down into base components and feed it into their collective." "How many worlds have they hit?" Reeves asked as her team prepared the survivors for evacuation. 7 so far, Veltar replied. "And they're spreading. My people tried to warn others, but most species won't listen. They think it's someone else's problem." Reeves smiled grimly behind her helmet's faceplate. "Well, they just made it humanity's problem." Back aboard the Indomitable, Admiral Blake listened to Veltar's briefing with growing alarm. The Void Swarm wasn't a conventional military force. It was something far more dangerous. A self-replicating machine collective that consumed entire civilizations to fuel its own expansion. "They appeared in our outer system without warning," Veltar explained, his voice hollow with exhaustion and grief. "Our defense forces tried to stop them, but conventional weapons were useless. The swarm simply absorbed the energy from our attacks and used it to replicate more machines." Blake studied the tactical data that Veltar had provided. The swarm operated like a virus, spreading from system to system and consuming everything in its path. Each world it devoured provided resources for expansion, making it stronger and more difficult to stop. "What about their command structure?" Blake asked. "There has to be some kind of central control." Veltar nodded slowly. "Our scientists detected a massive command vessel at the heart of each swarm fleet, but it's heavily protected by thousands of smaller units. No single ship could hope to reach it." Blake smiled for the first time since entering the nebula. "Mr. Veltar, you've obviously never seen what happens when humans put their minds to solving a problem." Over the next 18 hours, Blake's fleet became the center of the most unusual military planning session in galactic history. Human tactical doctrine was based on flexibility, creativity, and the willingness to try tactics that other species would consider insane. The Void Swarm had never faced an enemy like that. The plan that emerged was typically human in its audacity. Instead of fighting the swarm conventionally, the human fleet would do something that violated every principle of space warfare. They would allow themselves to be partially consumed. Blake's ships began broadcasting false surrender signals, while simultaneously ejecting what appeared to be life pods and emergency beacons. To the swarm's sensors, it looked like a fleet in the process of abandoning ship. The machines moved in to harvest the valuable technology and raw materials. But the life pods weren't carrying refugees. They were carrying specially modified fusion warheads with human marines attached. As the swarm began to consume the abandoned human vessels, the marines and their explosive cargo were drawn deep into the collective's processing centers. The simultaneous detonation of 40 fusion warheads from within the swarm's own structure did something that no external attack had managed. It disrupted the collective's coordination protocols and created chaos within their perfectly ordered ranks. In that moment of confusion, Blake's fleet struck with everything they had. Human weapons weren't more advanced than what the swarm had faced before, but they were used in ways that no other species had ever considered. Kinetic projectiles became virus carriers, energy weapons became communication jammers, and mining charges became tactical nuclear weapons. But the real weapon was something the swarm couldn't understand or counter. It was the human capacity for sacrifice in service of others. When the battle turned against them, when it looked like the swarm might adapt to their tactics, individual human ships didn't retreat. They advanced, using themselves as weapons to buy their comrades time to reach the swarm's command vessel. The final assault on the command ship was led by Admiral Blake herself. As the Indomitable burned through the swarm's defenses, taking devastating damage with each passing second, Blake stood on her bridge and did what human commanders had been doing for centuries. She inspired her crew to do the impossible. "All hands, this is the Admiral," she announced over the ship's communication system. "In approximately 10 minutes, we're going to do something that military historians will either call the most brilliant tactical maneuver in the history of space warfare or the most spectacular failure ever recorded. Either way, we're going to give those machines something to remember humanity by." The Indomitable's final run at the command vessel was a thing of terrible beauty. The heavy cruiser shed armor plating and hull sections as it fought through the swarm's defenses. But it never slowed down. Blake's crew worked with the calm efficiency of people who had already accepted that they might not survive the next few minutes but were determined to make those minutes count. When the Indomitable finally reached the command vessel, Blake didn't try to destroy it with weapons. Instead, she rammed her ship directly into the collective's central processing core, carrying with her every nuclear warhead in the fleet's arsenal. The explosion that followed was visible from 3 star systems away. When the light faded, the Void Swarm's perfect coordination had collapsed into chaos. Without their central command, the individual machines began attacking each other, unable to maintain the collective consciousness that had made them so dangerous. Blake survived the collision, though her ship was reduced to a floating wreck held together by emergency force fields and pure human stubbornness. As rescue ships from the fleet reached the Indomitable, she looked out at the scattered remains of the swarm and allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Humanity had heard a cry for help from across the galaxy, and they had answered it. Cost had been high, but the alternative, allowing an entire civilization to be consumed, had been unthinkable. In the months that followed, word of the battle spread throughout the galaxy. The story was told and retold, growing with each telling until it became legend. The species that lived on a death world had traveled through a region of space that killed most ships, faced an enemy that had consumed 7 civilizations, and somehow emerged victorious. More importantly, they had proven something that many species had begun to doubt, that in a galaxy full of dangers and uncertainties, there was still one constant that could be relied upon. When someone, somewhere, sent out a desperate call for help, humanity would hear it, and they would answer. The Kalari rebuilt their civilization, with human assistance, becoming one of humanity's strongest allies in the years that followed. But the real victory wasn't the defeat of the Void Swarm. It was the message that humanity had sent to every species in the galaxy. No distress call would go unanswered. No cry for help would be ignored, and no enemy, no matter how powerful or terrifying, would be allowed to consume the innocent while humans drew breath. In the end, that promise was worth more than any technology or strategic advantage. It was what made humanity not just another species struggling for survival in a hostile galaxy, but the one that others looked to when hope seemed lost. The galaxy had learned something new about the species from Earth. They were dangerous not because of their weapons or their ships, but because of their refusal to abandon those who needed help. And that made them the most dangerous species of all.